everybody is given this information, this invitation. That's really what I wanted to say, was invitation. The first set were invited and they turned it away. They snubbed it. Nope, no, thank you. We're busy doing other things. They're not chosen. The second set all came in. Some were prepared and some were not prepared. Those who were not prepared were also cast aside. So all we have left are those that accepted the invitation and were prepared for the invitation. Hey everyone, welcome to Bible 365. I'm your host, Kathy Carter. I'm bringing you the Bible in 365 days. I'm reading it every day. I just shook the table. I'm reading it every day, sharing my thoughts, sharing probably a teaching with you. And I'm using the chronological Bible reading plan, which means historically, from oneyearbibleonline.com. And you can go on their website, download their free printable reading plan, or you can just click on it every day and it'll take you to the actual reading. So today we're on day 299. It is October 25th. Our reading is Matthew 21:28 through 22:33, Mark 12:1 through 27, and Luke 20:9 through 40. So we are heavy in the Gospels. I'm going to say that we're like maybe a week and a half outside of being done with the Gospels, week and a half. And so we've been just doing Jesus's teachings. And so what I'm going to do is, before I go into the actual reading that we have, I want to go back in history, which is something I always do. If you've never been with me before, I would like if you go all the way back to day 1 in Genesis, and I want you to start from there. Genesis 1, day 1, and then move on to build your foundation, because without all of that, this just doesn't have the impact that it has when you have all of those building blocks. If you've been here, of course, before, of course, just fast forward for 2 minutes to, like, I don't know, like the 3:34 minute area. God is the Lord over everything. He has created anything and everything that you can see, taste, touch, smell. See, I did that one already. See, taste, touch, smell, hear, everything. He's done everything. And he is the creator over all. He has made all things, and he made humans to be in his image, and he breathed life into us as humans. And then he put us in this perfect land in which he created. And he said, the only thing that you need to do is you need to rule over everything in this land, right? So you are in charge, and you may also not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so they seem to have been in charge, but they allowed a serpent to come in, and that serpent tempted them. And in that temptation, they ate from the tree. And in that eating, they severed a bond between the Lord and themselves. And then this bond has been severed all through time. And so the Lord has sent people to kind of bring us back in towards him. And we really never listened. Like, we would listen for a time and then we fall away, and then listen for a time and then fall away, and then listen for a time, right? Like he did this through the nation of Israel. And then because nothing was working, he sent his son, which is himself, which is the Messiah, to save the entire world. Humans were unable to do what only the Son of the Lord, or the Lord himself, is able to do. And so he sent him here, and now he is here. And while he is here, he is proving that he is the Son of the Lord. So he is healing, he is resurrecting. He's doing all the things that well, he's doing more, but he's doing a lot of the things that the original prophets did. But he's doing more. He's also proving that he's the Son of God. He keeps telling them he's the Son of God. And he's also giving them teachings. He's reminding them of who the Lord genuinely is. He's showing them, I want to say in some ways, the new way, which is really the way that God always wanted, but they just kept falling into the traps of the law. And so now we're finding Jesus. He's been wandering up and down Israel doing his teachings and healings for about 3 years. And now we find him in the Temple of Jerusalem. He came in the Temple of Jerusalem. At this point, 3 years in, so many people in the area know who he is. It's not just the Israelites who know who he is, but it's also a lot of the people on the outside of the area who are starting to hear things and see things and understand that he's a pretty big deal. And they might not understand all of it, but they are starting to understand that he's something, and he's something different. And so he is now in the temple doing teaching. So he's in the temple of the Lord, and he's doing teachings, which in reality, he shouldn't really be doing anyway, because he's only a carpenter's son. But they're allowing him to do teachings because the people are starting to follow him and everyone is really listening to him, even though the Pharisees and the Sadducees hate him. So the Pharisees and the Sadducees keep trying to like ask him questions in order to trap him, because they want to get rid of him, but they don't want to do it in a really outwardly way. They want to be a little bit more sneaky and like backdoorish about the way that they do it. And so that's what we're finding. He's talking to all of these people as he's there. And again, one of the things that we find in the Gospels is the stories repeat themselves. So a lot of our stories today, there's a couple of stories, but they are repeating themselves in each Gospel. So we're finding us now. This is the story of the two sons. And I need to go forward just a little bit, because we need to know where we were. Yesterday, the Pharisees kept trying to mess with him, as they do at the temple. And he was the last kind of conversation he had with them, because they were like, who gives you the power to do this? And he says, well, who gave John the power? And they essentially refused to answer. And so he was like, you're not answering me, so I'm not going to answer you. So they're sort of in a combative way. And if you recall, if you have been with me, if you haven't, then this might be new to you. But if you've been with me, the Pharisees are essentially the law of the Lord. They're the wisdom of the Lord, right? They're the teachers of the law and the Lord. So they're teaching all the people of Israel. And Jesus is coming up against that. And so they keep trying to kind of get rid of him, because he's shaking their foundations of what they believe is true. And he's also pushing up against some of the things that they're doing, because really they're in seats of power that they shouldn't necessarily be in. They're working hand in hand in some ways with Rome, and they're really only supposed to be for Israel. So where we find ourselves today is this story. So he just says, I'm not going to tell you by what authority I do these things either. And he's like, so what do you think? So now he's going to follow with a story. What do you think? There was this guy. He had two sons. And he said to the first son, listen, I want you to go work in the vineyard today. And the first son's like, no, I'm not going to do that. But then after some time, he changed his mind and he wound up working in the field. He goes to the second son. He says the same thing. And the son's like, I will go, but he doesn't go. So the first son says, I'm not going to go, but eventually changes his mind and goes. Second son says, I'm going to go. I'm going to, obviously I'm going to do what you want me to do, but then just doesn't. And so he says to them, which of the two did what his father wanted? And they answer the first. And he's like, yeah, truly I say to you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. And ahead of you would be the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now you're going to probably say, why? How does that make any sense? What does that have to do? I mean, maybe, you might not. You might be like, oh, totally makes sense. But what does that have to do with anything? The Pharisees are the ones that are handing down all of the rules. And so they're essentially saying to the Lord, I'm doing all that you want me to do. And the guy says, do this. And they say, I'm going to do this. But they're not really doing this. Because the thing that the Lord wants, and the thing that he has always wanted, right? He wants obedience, but he always wants love and compassion. It's just one of the things that he always wants. He has said through all the Old Testament, if you guys have been with me, like, your sacrifices don't matter. Love people. Stop with you're going in and you're doing these sacrifices by rote. Like, oh, I'm supposed to do this and I'm supposed to do that. But in your heart, you're holding on to wickedness. You're holding on to pride. You're putting yourself above other people, right? Your own importance is better than others. And that is never what they wanted. So they're saying, I'm obeying, but they're not really obeying. Now, the tax collector and the sinner are the people that have been ostracized. They've been put out of the kingdom. So essentially, they're like, I'm not following any of those laws. I'm going to lie, cheat, and steal to the people. I'm going to go out and again, being unfaithful to anyone and everyone, right? They're giving themselves to other people. So those are the people who are unwanted by anybody. They're the ones who are like, nah, I'm not going to do that. But then Jesus comes and they change their mind. And they're like, we are going to follow and we're going to listen to you. So he says, they're entering the kingdom ahead of you. It doesn't say that they're the only ones that are entering the kingdom. He's saying they're entering ahead of you. And by the way, I'm going to say that means they're entering the kingdom right at that moment, because they have given their hearts to Jesus. And so they're entering the kingdom. The Pharisees and the Sadducees are still back, not entering the kingdom yet. It doesn't mean that they can't, right? So there's nothing saying that they're never allowed to enter the kingdom. But right now, the people that they consider, they deem the lowest of the low, are entering the kingdom. And these guys are sitting in the back and they're not entering yet. And so, of course, it's enraging the Pharisees and Sadducees, who have their entire lives kind of thought that they were above here, right? Like they're the tops of the tops. They're the important people. So he says, and then even after you see this, you're still not repenting. So I'm telling you all of these things and you're just getting mad instead of actually turning towards me and repenting, which is what I desire for you to do. That's what the Lord wants. Then Jesus begins to speak to them in parables. And he says, a man plants a vineyard and he puts a wall around it, digs a pit for it for a wine press, puts a watchtower, and then rented the vineyard out to some farmers. So he builds this like glorious vineyard, and then he leaves it to people, like these people who are going to take care of it, and then he goes away. And so when the time comes that the money will start coming in, he sends a servant. So this guy sends a servant to them, and they, instead of treating the servant as they're supposed to, like, oh, you're right, we worked this hard for this amount of stuff and here's your share of it, you get it, and thank you for paying us for being here. Instead, they beat that servant and then send that servant away. And so the man sends another servant and they do the same thing. And then the man sends another servant and they kill that servant. And so the man's like, okay, I'm going to send my son. They have to listen to my son. I'm going to send my son. We're going to see what happens. It says, the tenants say to one another, this is the heir. So they know it's his son. Come on, let's kill him. If we kill him, the inheritance will be ours. And so they're trying to get rid of the son in order for them to have everything. They no longer want the son in charge. They want to be the ones in charge. As of right now, they are the ones that are the tops. They're the important ones. What will the owner of the vineyard do if that happens? He's going to come and he's going to kill the tenants, and then he's going to give the vineyard to other people. So now we're going to say that everyone that's on the top that he put in charge, he's going to get rid of all them. He's going to kill them. They're not going to have a good end. And then other people he's going to put in their place. Leaves are dropping left and right. So he takes them, kills them, and throws them in the vineyard, throws them out of the vineyard. He says, haven't you read this passage of scripture that says, a stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. They have rejected, the servants rejected that stone. That stone, which is the heir, has become that corner, the most important of all pieces in the building. So this is back in one of the Psalms that it says this. So we're, again, going way back in Old Testament. The Pharisees and Sadducees would have known exactly what this meant. And he's like, you guys are rejecting this. The servants in this story are rejecting this. And this one is the most important one. And they're throwing that one away. He says, therefore, I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to people who are going to produce its fruit. Anyone who falls on the stone will be broken to pieces. Anyone to whom it falls will be crushed. And I'm going to say, for me, I believe anyone who falls on the stone will be broken to pieces. I actually think that's a good thing. I think anyone who could, because the cornerstone is the top, it's the best thing, right? Anyone who gives themselves willingly, voluntarily, lovingly gives themselves to the cornerstone, they're going to fall to pieces, which is actually a good thing, right? Like they're going to get rid of anything that is not of the Lord, right? They're going to fall into pieces. But anyone who doesn't is going to be crushed by that cornerstone. And so that's a bad thing. So falling to pieces in the cornerstone is good, right? That's what we want, because then the Lord's going to build you back up again. But being crushed by a cornerstone is not good. And then it says, then the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders looked for a way to arrest him because they realized that the parable had been spoken against them. So remember I said parables were spoken for any number of different reasons. And it could have been because he was trying to open their ears with a story. He was trying to condemn them with a story, right? Their ears were open, they understood. Or it was because they just didn't understand, right? So there were three, probably possibly more, but at least three different reasons why he told stories, why he told parables instead of just came outright and just said certain things. Then he moves on. So he's in this whole area, he's kind of just condemning the Pharisees. And so this one, we're going to see another condemnation on the Pharisees. Jesus spoke to him again, and he says, the kingdom of heaven, so the place where the Lord is, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding. He's preparing a banquet for his son. He sends his servants out to get anyone who is invited. So he sends them out, and he tries to bring all the people that are invited in, but they're refusing to come. So anyone who has been invited, I'm going to say the Pharisees, again, maybe Pharisees is the wrong word. I just use that as a bubble, as like a general, but these are all the people who had been following the Lord. Couldn't really spit out what I was going to say. Following the Lord in a really strong way, right? The original people that were given all of this message. And mostly they were what would be deemed righteous Israelites. So I'm saying Pharisees, but it was really righteous Israelites, right? Like it was really those who believed and followed the Lord. That's who this was all given to. The most important, the power was all the way up in like the kings and the priestlyhood and all of that stuff. So that's why I'm kind of using the Pharisees as an umbrella, because I feel like they generally encompass what that is. So when you hear me say that, I really mean not just the Pharisees, but like all of the Israelites that were given this original message. The sinners and those who they had pushed away, they were different. So they were the ones that were invited to the feast, and they refused to come. Then he sends more servants and says, tell those who have been invited that I prepared my dinner. Like, hey, you guys are refusing to come, but like I'm ready for you, so come on. And they said no. They refused to come to the wedding banquet. They paid no attention, and they did all kinds of different things. And the rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. So not only did they ignore servants, but then they mistreated and killed the servants. So they couldn't even just leave it alone at that. They needed to have like violence and anger in there also. Then he sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. So anyone who's invited has now been destroyed because they have rejected the invitation, and then they killed the people that sent the invitation. This sounds a lot like what we just heard with the vineyard, right? He's just saying it in a different way. So now he says, go to the street corners and invite anyone that you find. So anyone and everyone that you see on the street corners, just scoop everybody up and bring all of them into my house, the good as well as the bad. But then the king comes in to see his guests. So right now, like anyone and everyone has come. But then the king comes in and he starts looking around. So now we're at a wedding banquet, and this is still the king's wedding banquet. So there's still importance to this king's wedding banquet. And he looks around and he's like, why aren't they all in wedding clothes? Like this guy right here doesn't have any wedding clothes on. He's not prepared for the wedding. So they went out, they were invited. They knew it was a wedding, but he wasn't prepared for the wedding. And because he wasn't prepared for the wedding, he said he told the attendants to tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And this is what he follows up and he says, many are invited, few are chosen. So everybody is given this information, this invitation. That's really what I wanted to say was invitation. The first set were invited and they turned it away. They snubbed it. Nope, no thank you. We're busy doing other things. They're not chosen. The second set all came in. Some were prepared and some were not prepared. Those who were not prepared were also cast aside. So all we have left are those that accepted the invitation and were prepared for the invitation. And I could probably say a lot of things about being prepared, but I think it's just important to understand that they were prepared for it to be a wedding. They heard it was a wedding and they prepared themselves to go to a wedding. And so those were the ones that were chosen by the Lord. Those were the ones that were chosen by the king in this story. Now they come down and it says they're trying to catch him. Here we go again with these Pharisees. Now they're super mad. He keeps telling stories out against them. And now they're like, we got to trap this guy. So we have some Pharisees and some Herodians. Herodians are followers of King Herod. They're Israelites. Remember, King Herod was kind of sort of an Israelite. There is like he was adopted into a Jewish family and he understood a lot, but he was like in between Rome and Israel, right? But a lot of people followed him because he gave them power. So we have these Herodians who were Israelites who were also like really faithful to King Herod. And so nothing what they were getting upset about was anything pushing against the leadership of King Herod. So if you're pushing against the leadership of King Herod, which maybe they were comfortable in that leadership, right? They were given a certain amount of power and they were like, this is good. We like this right where it is. Being with the person before or after him might be awful. So we kind of like this bubble that we're sitting in. And so they're like, we got to get this guy out of here. He's going to mess up that delicate balance that we have perfected, that we got this just right for our people. And so we got to come up here and we got to trap him in something. So here's what they say. Teacher, we know that you're a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. So right away, they're schmoozing him and they're putting out some stuff that they're trying to catch him, because if he is all of those things, then he might argue for what we would deem the opposite side of the argument they want him to argue for. So he's like, is it right? Not he, they, the Pharisees and the Herodians, is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we? So we've seen another tax thing, and this is actually a little bit different. So the other tax issue we saw was a temple tax. And he walked in and I think he was with Peter, and the Israelites were like, oh, what, your guy doesn't pay the temple tax? And Jesus was like, of course I pay the temple tax. Here, go get the temple tax. And he gave it to them, right? Through the miracle of a fish. Because he was like, I'm not a priest. I'm not anybody special. I'm not trying to get my way out of the taxes. This is something different. It's an imperial tax that has been given by Rome. And I've told you already, probably on more than enough occasions, that tax collectors were like really deemed ugly. The money that they were giving was going to Rome. So an imperial tax, from what I read, I am not an accountant. I don't know a huge amount of all this stuff, but from what I understand, it's a flat tax. So it's sort of like a sales tax, right? Everything has a sales tax on it. And so it's this tax no matter if you can or can't pay it, right? Everyone's got essentially this sales tax. And so on every item that they purchase, they need to pay this tax. Once again, we're going to see that some people might be exempt from that tax, or that's an unfair tax. That tax shouldn't be on Israel because Israel isn't necessarily buying the goods or selling the goods from Rome, right? Like, so there are all these like in between issues. And this is why they're trying to trap him. They're trying to take him and turn him like he's trying to have a coup, right? Like to take over the kingship of King Herod. And so they're like, we shouldn't have to pay the imperial tax. Is it right? I shouldn't say we shouldn't. Is it right to pay the imperial tax? And so he once again messes with them. Hey, show me one of those coins. Gives him a coin. It's a man-made coin. So he shows the coin, and on the coin is Herod's face, and he said, or Caesar's face, sorry. And so he says, give unto Caesar what's Caesar's. Give unto God what's God's. It's not really an answer. Let's be clear. Could we say that means you should pay your taxes? We could say that if we're trying to be black and white. I don't think that was the point. I think the point was recognizing, first of all, that everything is God's. Where we are is where we are. Following the rules of where we are is part of being where we are. And if you are an honest, loving citizen that's following the Lord, you do what is asked of you in the nature of whatever it is in the area in which you live, right? Unless it would be sinning against God, and paying a tax certainly wouldn't be sinning against God. So you give Caesar what's Caesar's, you give God what is God's, and that just is what it is. That's part of being alive on this earth. And sometimes you're not going to like the laws that come down, but you have to follow them anyway. Sometimes you're not going to like the extra money that you need to pay or the way that things are working in your world, but you are a citizen of that nation, and whatever comes down is what you have to do. They're trying to trap him again. So this time the Sadducees are coming, trying to trap him. So they kind of pulled that tax thing, and now they're going to pull this resurrection thing. Sadducees don't believe in a resurrection, which is really interesting because the Sadducees are a sect of Israel. And maybe resurrection is the wrong word. So what we had learned in the Old Testament is after your body dies, there is life and there is death. And this is after the body is gone. What that looked like, we didn't necessarily talk about too much. But what we would have understood is that life continues after death, or life ends after death. Now, they don't believe in the resurrection, I believe, of a body. So they have a difference of opinion as to maybe what that life and death looks like. And so he doesn't believe in the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. So they're going to try and butt up against the resurrection with him. So let me tell you a story. He says, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but we heard this with Tamar, right? So Tamar was married to Judah, one of Judah's sons, and she didn't produce a child with him. He died. And then another son, they didn't produce a child. That person died. And then he kept her from the third son, but then she wound up having children with Judah. So there's a rule that, and then when they have the child, that child is the one that carries on the name, right? Gets the first son property and winds up carrying on the name. And so he's like, so there's these 7 sons, and she winds up getting married to every single one of them because she never has a kid. So she keeps marrying all of them. And after all of them die, who's she going to be married to in the resurrection? So if all being what it is, and all 7 sons come back to life, and she comes back to life, she's been married to every single one of them. Who was she married to in the resurrection? Who would she be married to? And he's like, once again, you misunderstand everything. You don't understand. And this is another note to us that when we, and I have pulled back so much from doing this, when we say it is absolutely 100% this, we are probably going to butt up against the fact that we might be wrong. Now, I'm not saying don't hold firm in your belief. I think that's part of having faith, right? Is I have faith that this is what it says. But being willing to see it a little bit different, and being willing that if somebody comes up and has maybe a greater understanding, to be able to listen to them and say, you know what, they might not be wrong. And I think this is really important because they were fighting so hard against this because they were like, nope, this is what it looks like. And he's like, you don't understand anything. That's not what the resurrection is going to look like. So it says, when the dead rise, they're not going to marry. They're not going to be given in marriage. They're going to be like angels in heaven. So we're not going to have the same, it's not going to look the same as it does here on earth. What it's going to look like, here's what we know. They're not going to be married, and they're not going to get married or be given in marriage. That's one of the things that we know. And he says, now about the dead rising, haven't you read in Moses on the account of the burning bush? So when he was up and he was talking to God in the burning bush, God says to him, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Those 3 sons were already dead for hundreds of years. And so he says, he doesn't say I was, or they were my sons. He says, I am the Father. So there's an understanding in Scripture then that therefore means they will be alive again, right? Or they are still alive at this moment. Not necessarily in bodily form, but they are still alive. Some of the teachers of the law responded, well said, teacher. And then no one dared to ask him any more questions. They were done. They had given up kind of this portion of the questions and asking him. So now they're going to try and probably come at him at a different way. And we're going to see that another time because we are done for today. And so if you stuck with me and you found it to be a blessing, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Keep reading as always, and I'll see you guys next time.